Welcome to episode 4 of Triple Sigma. Joining us today is a very special guest, four-time Major League All-Star closer, Mark Melancon. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you. This is going to be a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Mark and I actually met each other about 10 years ago. He was on the Pittsburgh Pirates at the time, visiting, playing against the San Francisco Giants, interested in touring the Google campus, and his agent was friends with a colleague of mine at Google, and she didn't know much about baseball and knew that I did. And so she ended up setting us up on a little bit of bro date, a little tour around campus. And so Mark always struck me as a very cerebral guy. He separated himself not just with a strong arm, but with a strong mind. And because our viewing audience is obviously interested in improving themselves, you're interested in improving yourself every way you possibly can, who better to learn from than a major league closer? So Mark, for those who are not familiar with your story, can you tell our listening audience a little bit about how you ended up getting recruited to Arizona, where you were drafted, were you a prospect coming up, how you succeeded relative to other people, and the advantages that you felt that you gave yourself to succeed at the major league level?
Sure. Yeah, that's it's going back now. Growing up, always a multi-sport athlete, three sports in high school with football and basketball. I grew up in Denver, so the seasons really dictated, what sport you played. You weren't able to play baseball all year round or practice football all year round. So that was actually a good thing, in my opinion. I think my arm would have blown out if I lived in Southern California or Florida. Yeah, so just naturally, being involved in sports was my childhood, and my cousins were a big part of my childhood, having grown up similar age and being on the same teams and really pushing each other competitively, but also having that nucleus of connection. So my childhood, that was a strong point. And then getting into high school and continuing to play those three sports. And I went into high school kind of being recruited, even at a public school. I grew up playing football in a different town, and those were all my friends. So I had a choice to go to two different high schools. One was a bigger high school, one was a smaller high school. And the smaller high schools where my football friends were. And my cousin decided to go to that school prior to me making the decision. And once he did that, I felt like he made my decision for me. I'm not going to leave him, because we were really good athletes and saw each other every day. So it was just natural to go together wherever we went. That was good, because I wouldn't say a big fish in a small pond, but it definitely helped, being in a little bit smaller school and not this massive, a school where they were probably going to push me to only play two sports instead of all three. And I just didn't want to do that. When I talk to kids these days, I tell them, please play as many sports as you can. You never know how long you're going to play, and just enjoy it. And if I wouldn't have played football, if I wouldn't have played basketball, I really don't think I would have made it to the big leagues in baseball. Those two other sports taught me so many different lessons that you just can't learn on the baseball field. And the different coaches that I had in those sports taught me, things. So I really value that time in my life and give credit to a lot of different things. My cousin, first of all, my cousins, my coaches in the other sports, and and those days I really look back and enjoyed being able to do different stuff. So really had a fun upbringing
So
in Denver.
what would you say the top lessons you learned as a basketball player or a football player were that translated into becoming the all-star closer that you became?
Good question. In basketball, kind of court awareness, and the coach that we had in high school was awesome, but just kind of pushed in a sense of toughness and doing the details and being, whether it was on time or knowing the practice plan ahead of time. Just different sports bring out different things. And I don't know if I can even put a word on it, but the details that sport calls for matters, and ultimately somehow, some way is going to tug into my sport, baseball, you and my sport. But those details mattered at the end of the day, where on the baseball field, I was never called to know what the practice plan was, as an example. But in basketball, we needed to know what the practice plan was before we got to practice. And if you didn't look at the sheet, you didn't take time, you just showed up in a hurry and didn't pay attention, he was going to call us out on that. And so just the prepping of practice and getting your mindset right for that practice was important to him. And ultimately I carried that over and I saw why, 15, 20 years later, I understood why he cared so much about that, because it puts you in a different mindset for that day.
So when you were competing at the world-class level, did you find that a lot of your peers prepared the same way you were trained to as a varsity basketball player? Or did you find that a lot of them got by on talent and maybe didn't stay at the major league level as long as they could have, had they had what you would have considered basic preparation skills that you developed by the time you were 18 years old?
You can find examples of everything, but I think the less talented guys relied on the details more. And I feel like in my case, I wasn't nearly as talented as, you know, 80% of the league, but I found ways to level up and in many cases even be above. And that ultimately became the fun of it for me, is like, how am I going to beat you even though you have a bigger tool chest? And so working smarter and not harder.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's something that I teach a lot of my executive coaching clients as well as my fitness clients is how can we turn this into a game? And a
Uh-huh.
lot of people think, well, baseball is a game, but at the major league level, baseball is also a business. And a lot of people feel pressure, particularly, if you're making league minimum in the major leagues, you're making 10 times what you'd be making if you got dropped down to AAA,
Right.
as a younger player. And so that element of pressure is always going to be in the back of your mind. Somehow you were able to turn it into a game and turn it into a
Mhm.
game, or keep it a game, and keep it a game that you always wanted to find ways to continue to succeed in. So what were the main tools you were able to rely on to make sure that you were still playing a game and that your mind wasn't focused on the business aspect of it? Oh, I can make life-changing money. I can make generational wealth. No, I need to execute on this pitch right now.
Yeah. It's funny you bring the gamifying things up, because that's exactly going through Tommy John rehab and doing the monotonous things every single day. You have to come up with some creative games and strategies just to enjoy the day, because it's so monotonous. And that goes for any job, right? There's things you want to do and don't want to do, but I think in such a competitive world, if you can gamify every little thing, ultimately your production level is going to be higher, because you're getting, a little bit out of everything instead of looking at it as one big picture and trying to win the game. Yeah, you win the game, but did you execute on X, Y, and Z within the game, which is ultimately at the end of the season really going to take you to a different level. But yeah, I mean, it just falls into that competitive nature, I think. Whether it's in the weight room or you making it a game, whether it's who's gonna know the lineup the best in the bullpen. And these aren't verbal games they're just within yourself. So yeah.
Now, you mentioned being less talented in your mind than 80% of the league. Would you mind sharing, were you a big recruit to Arizona? You were drafted obviously in a round that qualified you as a prospect, but most people drafted in the sixth round don't really make it. What do you think separated you from everybody else? And when did you realize, no, I'm actually capable of not just playing at the highest level, but remaining at the highest level and dominating the highest level? How did
Yeah.
that mindset shift happen?
I don't know if I'm less talented, but it's not like I throw 100 miles an hour. I'm 6'2", white guy, that it's not like I'm jumping out of the gym or doing something crazy that I just stand out completely from everybody else. And so therefore I feel like, yes, I'm talented and all that, but I definitely made good on my athleticism. But a lot of things have to fall your way too.
When did you realize that you were actually good enough to dominate
I think college, and my dad says this, but he's like, man, I was just happy that you made the varsity team in high school. And then all of a sudden you're in college and it's like, this is such a bonus to be there. And I kind of felt the same way. It's like, I'm not in middle school looking and going, I'm going to be in the big leagues. I expect to be there. I think you just take it as it comes and you live in the present and you try to be as good as you can at that time. And all of a sudden things fall into place. And if you do it that way, you're not really disappointed if you don't get there because you didn't. Yes, you want expectations. So maybe I'm wording this wrong, but I think people go wrong. I see it, with my son and some of the parents that it's like they expect to be there. Well, guess what? In reality, you're not going to get there. I don't care how good you are because so many things have to fall into place. So, um, having high goals, and that's important, but also just being present and making sure that you can be as good as you can that day and that season. I think it pays dividends to think that way.
So I had a conversation with one of my clients last night who's a cryptocurrency executive. And we were talking about stress management and how with his project coming around, launching soon, it's hard for him to turn his mind off and rest. There's so many things that can go wrong. And what I was telling him is if you study elite athletes or if you study really successful people, oftentimes there's a difference between understanding what's rational and understanding what's going to help you win. And the way I'm going to bridge this gap between what you said and what I told him is that he's convincing himself that this might be the last bull run, the last big bull run. This might be the last time he might be able to make big, big money in crypto. And so he wants to get it right. And he wants to do anything that he has to do because he doesn't want to drop the ball here. And I told him, and I think this probably applies to the 5 or 10% most competitive people. Doesn't apply to everybody, but the 5 or 10% most competitive people need to figure out how to lie to themselves almost, and shift their attention away from how big the stakes are, and even convince themselves that the stakes aren't that big. And so when I listened to how you articulated your story, how you didn't even expect to, how could you have expected to play in the major leagues? Our first guest, Penn Murphy, was a 30-something round draft pick, made it to the big leagues. He also, as a teenager, didn't expect to make it to the major leagues. And I know you played with many guys in college who would have been drafted higher than you, and they didn't make it. They probably had higher expectations. And so at some point, there's an inversion between how bad you want it and how much you can focus on the present and how much your mind has convinced yourself that you have to have it and how well you can focus on the present. And for those really, really competitive people, what I always say is oftentimes, when I was an infielder, if I had a hot shot, hot one hopper hit to me, I kind of told myself, hey, I'm probably not going to make this play. And you know what that did is it kept my hands loose. And I never even tried to catch the ball when it was ripped to me. I just tried to keep it in front of me. And I could do that as a second and third baseman because at second and third base, you don't need to field the ball cleanly to get the guy out. And guess what? I always caught the ball.
Yeah.
Right? I always caught the ball because my hands were loose, and my hands were loose because my expectations were lower, but obviously they were higher than the average person. Like I wasn't, I'm going to miss this play.
Right.
But like I really kind of thought I would. And so, there's sports psychologists who say you have to envision yourself, succeeding at everything and everything. And when you actually talk to really successful people, you do envision yourself succeeding, but also at times you don't.
Yeah.
And it's not like you envision yourself failing. It's just like, whatever happens later. I'm going to focus on today. And so there is something that I've noticed with you and with other elite pitchers, elite closers, where they don't feel the pressure. They feel pressure, but they don't feel the same pressure that the average person would feel if you told them, hey, this is the gravity of the situation and you may only have one shot. Here's the ball.
I think that's well said because it's not that you don't have an expectation and you're not going to be happy if it doesn't work out. You're going to be pissed. And, at the end of the day, you will have expected to make that play or close the game out. But in the moment, you are real with yourself and you understand that you're human but to your point, it's kind of this psychology trick of, hey, I have to relax. I have to let my hands relax in order to make this play. And in reality, if I don't, it's going to be okay. I'll figure it out afterwards. But right now I'm going to relax and whatever happens, happens. And it almost just calms you down. So it's a weird weird psychology thing for sure. But I think you said it well.
And one thing I noticed as I got to playing in higher levels is that more and more of my teammates were religious. And I realized that if you think that God is looking over you, that's a very big stress reducer. It's a lot
Yeah.
easier to go from way too tense to just a little bit tense and fall into the zone. Is that something that you experienced?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, it puts me at ease and allows me to be who I am. And you realize that it's just a game at the end of the day. And even though there's 60,000 people watching on, in the stadium, at the end of the day, you're not answering to them. You're playing to the audience of one, and that's the man upstairs. So, um, yeah, there is a comforting, ease at that.
But obviously, you can have all the tricks up your sleeve. You can have a great relationship with God. You're still going to feel nervous. So, what
100%.
was the most nervous you ever felt on a major league field? Maybe besides your major league debut, in terms of the gravity of the situation. If you remember, what was going on through your mind? How did you calm yourself down? How did you succeed? How did you get through it?
Yeah. So it was in the first year, probably not too long after I debuted, but I was in Toronto. Jose Molina was catching me. It was a day game. The roof was open, beautiful day. But for some reason, the ball felt like it was so slippery. It was at the end of the game, and the balls, they get rubbed up before the game, oftentimes hours before the game. And the mud that they use ends up turning to powder towards the end of the game. Some of these balls could have been rubbed up days before, maybe even weeks before, because it's crazy, such an important part of the entire game and how it works. But the clubbies are relied upon to rub the balls up. And there's no exact way to do it. Some can have more mud on them, some don't. And the reason you rub them up is it kind of works the leather in and it gives a tackiness to it. And the white, fresh leather isn't the best feel. So they put this special mud on. I think there's one person in the US that is allowed to submit their mud from Louisiana. And it's crazy to think about. But anyways, for some reason, late in the game, that mud had turned to powder. I mean, you could blow on the ball and it just poof, all the mud goes away. And I'm out there pitching. I don't even know what the score is. We're either winning by a lot or losing by a lot because I didn't have a real role. But I called Jose Molina out to the mound. I'm like, Jose, I don't know, have any clue where this ball is going to go. At this point, it's in my head and it might be at the backstop. It might be right down the middle. Who knows? And thankfully, he was a veteran and, I was like, this is no big deal. Let's go change up here. Well, I don't even hardly throw a change up. And I ended up getting a fly ball to left field and we get out of it. But I was so domed up. It was crazy. And the thoughts that were going through my head were, I'm on this Hall of Fame team. This is 2009. We ended up winning the World Series that year, but I'm going to get sent back down to AAA immediately after this game. And I may or may not ever get called back up. This could be the last pitch I ever throw in the big leagues. And, all these things are going through your head. And you just got up this year and made your dream and all this stuff. And you have a chance to stay there, which is quite honestly harder than getting up to the big leagues is staying there. And so in a super flash, all these negative thoughts go on. And how long do these thoughts stick with you? That can be really a challenge for guys. And I do for a few days after that, those thoughts still ran through my head. Even like picking over to first base, I remember going, whoa, I don't have that same fluid motion. I'm worried the ball's going to fly out, all that stuff. But the
You had
way
the
that I
pre-yips.
yeah, it's pre-yips. And I remember I did pick over one time during those 2 or 3 days, and I saw like the first base coach, I saw the runner, I saw somebody in the stands. I saw everything except the first baseman's glove. And it was kind of like, oh, let the ball go and it bounced there. And it just gets in your head, these things. It's just crazy how it can mess with your mind. But the way that I combated that stuff was I'm going to attack it. Like the next day after I picked off and I had that, I got out there early and I said, hey, I need somebody over there at first base. I'm going to throw 50 of these pickoff moves and get that out of my head. I'm going to throw it as hard as I can. I don't care if it sails to the sands, but I'm going to get through this because I know that I can pick off. Like I've done it my whole life. There's no reason that I can't. I'm healthy. I'm good. I'm going to get through this. This is just a mental block. But a lot of guys don't combat what they're feeling, and they just hope that feeling goes away. That feeling's not going to go away unless you work through it. And the way that you work through it is in a safe environment and allow yourself to kind of baby step. So before it gets
Well, a lot of people don't realize that pitchers really don't like throwing to anybody who's not a catcher.
yeah,
And
yeah, that can be the case for sure.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and so it's weird because I never saw this at the high school level. Typically in high school, the pitcher's the best athlete if the shortstop isn't. And a lot of times the pitcher plays shortstop and the shortstop pitches. And none of the pitchers have issues throwing the ball to first base. But then when you get to the college level and beyond, a lot of the pitchers who should be better than the pitchers in high school, they don't like it. It's every pitch they throw for the most part is in a bullpen, off a mound, or in long toss and in flat grounds, but they don't like fielding their position and throwing over.
But you
Why
just
do you think
said
that is?
well, you just kind of said it is because in high school you're playing shortstop, you're playing all these different positions, you're hitting, like you're loose, right? You go to college, you go to pros, you're funneled into doing one thing. You're a robot. All you do is throw bullpens, you pitch 60 feet, 6 inches. That's it. You're not allowed to take ground balls. You're not allowed to throw it across the diamond. And I'm totally against that. In the last few years of my career, I was taking ground balls at third base. I was being an athlete because, first of all, it got me loose for the game. It was fun. I haven't got to do this in 15 years, and now I get to do it. And I look forward to going to the yard because I knew during BP I could go shag balls and field ground balls and do that stuff. And it was like, finally, why aren't we always athletes?
Yeah, and that gets into the specialization. So, if I can summarize a lot of what you said, it very much aligns with what I teach my most competitive clients and those who follow me online, where everybody's trying to push kids to specialize at a young age. Mark is saying, if I specialized at a young age, I probably wouldn't have made it to the big leagues. Everybody's saying, imagine where you want to be, manifest that, think about it as much as you can, and that's how you're going to achieve, your dreams. And Mark didn't even think he had the capacity to be a major leaguer when he was in high school, and his dad and him were just happy that he made it to college, which let him stay in the moment. And then when he finally got to the highest level, a lot of people probably said, hey, there's no reason to risk injury. You have a job and it's on the mound. You're not a third baseman. You're never going to be a third baseman. But he was able to make his job fun. He was able to turn everything that he did, whether it was preparation for games, rehabilitation, whatever it was, turn it into a game so he could continue having the motivation to show up and put the work in that's necessary to prepare. And so everything that's going on in his mind is, how can I make the process enjoyable? How can I relax myself so that I can succeed at the highest level? It's not, I need to be the best player ever. It's, how can I put myself in a position where I like what I'm doing and I'm relaxed yet focused enough to do it well?
Yeah. And, it's goal setting, right? And it's passion behind it. Your goal is to be the best that you can be. And having people along the way to push you is always good. But the day to day, it's small wins. You're not moving mountains in one day. So understanding that and being real with yourself is important.
And so you recently retired and have moved on to hopefully bigger and better things, but definitely a change of pace. What are your goals over the next 10 years, 20 years in your life? What will make you look back when you're 60, 70 years old and think, I didn't just do it right on the baseball field. I did it right at every station that I was in?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a question that I'm kind of asking myself every day because I am in this transitional period. I think immediately my goals are fortunate to have 3 kids that are at great ages right now and really enjoy being around my wife and I. So I want to take advantage of that. I am so fortunate to have the ability to kind of be home and be with them as much as I can and just pour into them. So I've taken advantage of that and trying to show up at every event and coach every sport. All three of my kids are playing. I mean, it's a full-time coach for me right now, but it's even more than that, setting up little things on the weekends just to go shoot around, and it's not really organized. It's impromptu. Just being with the kids and the family and enjoying that is my short-term goal. And that's something that when I'm 60, 70, 80 years old, I think I'll look back on and be very proud of that because I'm in a position to take advantage of that. And if I go a million miles an hour, like I probably deep down inside me wants to do and make more money and be successful in that way, there's still time for that. And I don't have the exact, like, what am I going to do next, which I've never had that before. I've always known
Right.
exactly what I'm going to do. And it is a struggle. Like, um, I wish I had it, but I think the chips are falling in place and they'll fall the way they should. But ultimately, if I can take advantage of this time with my family, that is something that I don't think I will ever regret. And having talked to older people, every person says that. So I just know the wisdom behind that is accurate, and I'm going to trust that I'll be fulfilled with that. And I have been fulfilled this last year. It excites me to know that I do have that guidance and wisdom from other people to make sure that it is right. Yeah.
Mark, it's so impressive that you've been able to be so successful while being so balanced in your life. But if you actually think through what you were talking about and, the observations that I had with other people, you haven't been successful in spite of your balance. It seems like you've been successful because of your balance.
Yeah, yeah, that's balance is such an important word, right? Because I mean, we see these super, super talented and successful athletes, and oftentimes they aren't balanced, right? And that's what makes them so good on the field, but then their off the field stuff is a little crazy, and so it's like, which one do you want? And if you can have the best of both worlds, I think it plays well. You may not be a Hall of Famer, but your life will be better off, so not to say that nobody can do that, but so I think that's always been in my mind is like just be balanced and be flexible and understanding. At the end of the day, like we talked about earlier, there's more in store than what's on this earth. And so, yeah, I think that's where my head has been.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I thought this was a tremendously illuminating conversation. If you in the listening audience liked it as well, I encourage you to like, subscribe to the channel, comment below if you have any questions. Mark, I know you had social media when you were playing. Are you still active on it? Is there any way that the listening audience can stay in touch with what's new in your life?
Sure, sure. I'm probably bound to be more active now, but I haven't been extremely active. But I think it is a good way to kind of continue to stay in touch with people and highlight things. So yeah, Instagram, Twitter, yeah, those things are easy.
Well, I'll tag his accounts on these clips. Again, thank you for joining, and really looking forward to learning more from you in the years to come.
No, thanks, Alex. It's always fun to learn from you, and I think we share a lot in the sense of always educating and being better. What you're doing here with the podcasts and the workouts, and I'm always impressed. You dive deeper than almost anybody I know, and educate yourself and further yourself. So I'm excited to continue to watch these podcasts. As always, we'll be in touch.